The radio crackled at 3:47 hours and every pilot in the ready room went silent. Static, then breathing, then a voice so calm it made the hairs stand up on the back of Major Rick Donovan's neck. Ghost lead to any station, this is Warrant Officer Holt, call sign Revenant. I'm 3 minutes out from the valley. Solo ingress. If you're monitoring this frequency, I'm going in. The transmission cut. Donovan stared at the speaker mounted above the tactical display, his coffee forgotten in his hand. Around him, 6 other pilots exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with something darker, recognition. The Black Valley. Everyone knew about the Black Valley. It sat like a scar across the northern ridgeline, a 12-mile stretch of granite and shadow where the terrain itself seemed designed to kill aircraft. In the past 14 months, 9 coalition jets had gone down in that corridor. 9. Not one pilot made it out. Surface-to-air missiles nested in the cliffs like hornets, radar systems hidden in caves that swallowed electronic signatures, and a sky so narrow that ejection meant slamming into rock before your chute deployed. Command had declared it a no-fly zone 3 weeks ago, and now someone, some warrant officer nobody had ever heard of, was flying straight into it. Alone. In an A-10 Thunderbolt. Donovan set his coffee down and leaned over the communications officer's shoulder. Did she say Holt? The officer nodded, fingers already pulling up the flight roster. Warrant Officer Cade Holt, assigned to the 104th Fighter Squadron. She wasn't on the sortie list tonight. Another pilot, Captain Marcus Webb, spoke up from the back. Holt. Wait, isn't that the washout from the Raptors? The one they benched after she froze up on that close air support run in Kandahar? Donovan didn't answer. He was already pulling up the tactical map, watching a single transponder blip crawling toward the valley's mouth. The A-10 was low, maybe 200 feet off the deck, hugging the terrain in a way that would have been suicidal for anything faster. But the Warthog was built different, slow, ugly, tough, and apparently flown by someone with a death wish. The comms officer's screen flickered. Sir, she's not responding to hails. IFF is active, but she's locked us out of her channel. Donovan's jaw tightened. Whoever this Holt was, she just committed career suicide. Unauthorized mission. Violation of restricted airspace. If she survived, and that was a big if, she'd be court-martialed before her wheels touched down. But something about that voice on the radio stuck with him. That eerie calm. Like she'd already made peace with not coming back. Around the ready room, the other pilots began to move. Webb pulled up the valley's last known threat assessment. Lieutenant Yara Singh started calculating ingress angles. Even the maintenance chief, a grizzled tech sergeant named Holloway, stopped his inspection checklist and turned toward the displays. Because the truth was, nobody survived the Black Valley. And if Warrant Officer Cade Holt was flying in their solo, they were about to witness either the most spectacular act of courage or the most pointless death in theater. Donovan keyed his headset. Get me Colonel Rains, now. But even as he said it, his eyes stayed locked on that solitary blip, inching closer to the valley's black throat. The A-10's transponder pulsed once, twice, then vanished as the terrain swallowed it whole. The ready room held its breath. Somewhere in the darkness, 9 miles north, Cade Holt tightened her grip on the stick and watched the mountains rise up to meet her like teeth. She'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years. 2 years since they'd grounded her. 2 years since they'd stripped her call sign and whispered behind her back. 2 years since the night that broke her. Tonight, she was taking it all back, or she was dying in the attempt. Either way, the mockery ended here. The A-10's engines growled, low and steady, as the valley's shadows reached out to claim her. The clock on her dash read 3:50, 3 minutes until she reached the kill box. 3 minutes until the Black Valley learned what Revenant really meant. Colonel Adrian Rains arrived in the command center at 3:52, still buttoning his uniform jacket. He didn't run, colonels didn't run, but his pace had the urgency of a man who'd just been woken with the words unauthorized penetration of restricted airspace. The night shift operations officer, a captain whose name Rains could never remember, met him at the door with a tablet already glowing. Sir, we have a rogue asset inbound to Sector 7-9er. Single A-10, no flight plan, no authorization. Pilot identified as Warrant Officer Cade Holt, 104th Fighter Squadron. Rains took the tablet, his eyes scanning the data even as his mind raced through protocols. Sector 79er, the Black Valley, Christ. How long ago did she enter the zone? 90 seconds, sir. 90 seconds. She was already inside, already committed. Rains looked up at the main display, where a dozen officers now stood in a loose semicircle, watching the empty space where Holt's transponder had disappeared. The valley itself showed on thermal as a cold blue canyon, its walls too steep for any angle that didn't end in a fireball. Get me your squadron commander, and somebody tell me why a warrant officer has access to a combat-loaded warthog in the middle of the night. Around him, people moved. Phones were lifted. Keyboards clattered. But Rains kept his eyes on that map, on that absence where a blip should have been. He'd seen pilots do stupid things before, showboating, proving themselves, running from something, but this was different. This was deliberate, calculated. This was a pilot who'd looked at the most dangerous piece of sky in the entire area of operations and decided it was exactly where she needed to be. The door burst open and Major Donovan entered, slightly out of breath. "Sir, I have background on Holt." Rains gestured for him to continue. Donovan pulled up a file on the nearest screen. A photo appeared. A woman in her early 30s, dark eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it, hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her expression was neutral, but there was something in the set of her jaw that Rains recognized. He'd seen it before in the mirror 20 years ago after his first squadron loss. Survivor's guilt, the kind that never quite healed. Warrant Officer Cade Holt, Donovan read. 32 years old. Prior enlisted, crew chief on C-130s before she applied for warrant officer flight training. Top of her class in rotary, but she pushed for fixed wing. Qualified on the A-10 18 months ago. 3 combat deployments, 47 successful close air support missions. Rains frowned. That's a solid record. So why haven't I heard of her? Donovan's expression darkened. Because 19 months ago, she was flying CAS for a Marine unit pinned down outside Kandahar. Ground commander called for danger close fire support. Holt was in position, had the shot, but she hesitated, called off her run. 3 Marines died in the next 60 seconds before the second aircraft could get there. The room went quiet. Rains felt the weight of that statement settle over everyone present. In close air support, hesitation measured itself in body bags. She claimed her targeting system glitched, Donovan continued. Diagnostics were inconclusive, but the ground commander filed a report. Word got around. Her call sign was Icarus. They took it away. Reassigned her to transport escort duties. She's been flying milk runs for a year and a half. Rain studied the photo again. Icarus, named for flying too close to the sun, and they'd stripped it from her because she wouldn't pull the trigger. Now she was flying into the one place where hesitation guaranteed death. What changed? Rains asked quietly. The operations officer stepped forward. "Sir, we just received intel. 40 minutes ago, a Marine reconnaissance team went dark in the Black Valley. 6-man unit. They were tracking a high-value target, suspected munitions cache. Last transmission indicated they were taking fire and pinned down." Rains closed his eyes. Of course that's what this was. Holt heard the distress call, Donovan said. It wasn't a question. She wasn't on the duty roster, she heard it on the guard frequency, and she took the only available and went after them. Rains opened his eyes and looked at the map again. Somewhere in that valley, 6 Marines were bleeding out. And one pilot who'd been called a coward for 19 months was betting her life that this time she wouldn't hesitate. Cade Holt's hands were steady on the stick, steadier than they'd been in years. The A-10 shuddered as she dropped to 150 feet, threading between canyon walls that rose like cathedral buttresses on either side. Her heads-up display painted the terrain in green and amber, altitude warnings flashing every 2 seconds. She silenced them with a thought muscle memory from 1,000 hours in the cockpit taking over. The Warthog wasn't graceful. It didn't need to be. Built around a 30mm Gatling gun that fired depleted uranium rounds, the A-10 was a flying tank designed for one purpose: close air support. Get low, get dirty, keep your people alive. The radio in her helmet crackled with encrypted chatter from the main net, but she'd switched to the guard frequency 20 minutes ago. That's where she'd heard them. The Marines. Call sign Reaper 6. 6 operators deep in the valley, mission gone sideways, calling for extract or air support or God himself. Nobody had answered. Command had declared the valley off-limits after the last shoot-down. Policy over people. Cade understood policy. She'd lived under its weight for 19 months. Tonight policy could go to hell. Her radar warning receiver squealed, a SAM sight painting her from the north. She banked hard right, the responding like a freight train on rails, slow but inexorable. Chaff bloomed behind her in metallic clouds, confusing the radar signature. The missile didn't launch. They were waiting. Watching. Smart, the valley's defenders had learned. They didn't waste shots on single aircraft anymore. They waited until you committed, until you slowed down to actually hit something, and then they lit you up from 3 directions at once. That's how they'd killed 9 pilots. Cade intended to be smarter. Her target management system cycled through waypoints, and she spotted it on the thermal feed, a hot cluster in a box canyon 3 miles ahead. Small arms fire. Muzzle flashes in infrared. And in the center, 6 fatting thermal signatures huddled behind a collapsed wall. Reaper 6, still alive, barely. She keyed her radio to the guard frequency. Reaper 6, this is Revenant. I have your position. Stay down. Danger close inbound in 90 seconds. There was a pause, then a voice crackled back, breathless and young. Revenant, we didn't request air. Command said. I know what Command said, Cade interrupted. Her voice was flat, calm. The voice she'd practiced alone in her quarters for months, stripping away the emotion. Stay down, heads buried, this is gonna be loud. She didn't wait for confirmation. Her fingers danced across the weapons panel, selecting the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. 30 millimeter, 70 rounds per second, the sound of God clearing his throat. Her heart rate hadn't changed. 62 beats per minute, same as always, same as Kandahar, but this time she wasn't going to freeze. This time, she was going to finish what she started. The A-10 roared over a ridgeline, and the box canyon opened before her like a wound in the earth. She saw them immediately. Enemy positions dug into the rocks, technical vehicles with heavy machine guns, at least 40 hostiles surrounding the pinned Marines. Her targeting pipper settled on the nearest cluster. She squeezed the trigger. The canyon had known silence before the A-10 arrived. The kind of silence that came after gunfire paused, when men caught their breath and checked their ammunition, and wondered if the next reload would be their last. Sergeant Danny Ortega pressed his back against the broken stone wall and tried to control his breathing. Blood soaked through the bandage on his leg, his own blood, though he couldn't remember exactly when he'd been hit. Beside him, Corporal Vance worked on their radio, trying to coax a signal through the mountains, but Ortega already knew the truth. They were 7 miles deep in the Black Valley. No air support, no quick reaction force. Command had written them off the moment their position got compromised. He looked at the 5 other faces gathered in their tiny defensive position. Young faces. Kids, really, though Ortega was only 26 himself. They'd come in quiet, looking for intel on a weapons cache. They'd found the cache, all right, and about 50 fighters who didn't appreciate visitors. 2 hours of running firefights had backed them into this box canyon with nowhere left to run. Above them, the stars wheeled in a strip of sky so narrow it looked like God had cracked the earth with a chisel. Beautiful in a way that made dying seem somehow more profound. Then Ortega heard it. A sound like distant thunder, but wrong. Thunder didn't growl. Didn't build with that particular mechanical snarl that made your teeth ache. He knew that sound. Every grunt knew that sound, but it was impossible. Holy shit, Vance whispered beside him, his hands frozen on the radio. Is that? The A-10 Thunderbolt came over the ridgeline at what had to be 200 feet, maybe less, its twin engines screaming as it dropped into the canyon like a bird of prey. Ortega had seen warthogs before, had called them in for support on 2 previous deployments, but never like this. Never this low, this fast, this impossibly close to the canyon walls. The aircraft was painted in standard combat gray, wings thick and straight, engines mounted high on the fuselage where they could survive ground fire, ugly as sin and twice as mean. And the pilot, whoever the pilot was, flew it like they were personally angry at the mountains. The A-10's nose lit up. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was a weapon from a different era, a different philosophy of warfare. Modern jets carried missiles and bombs, standoff weapons launched from miles away. The A-10 carried a gun. A gun so large the aircraft was essentially built around it. A gun that fired rounds the size of soda bottles at a rate that sounded less like individual shots and more like a continuous roar. Brrrrrrrrrrt. The sound tore through the canyon, and where the A-10's nose had pointed, the rock positions disintegrated. Not exploded. Disintegrated. Stone and earth and metal and men reduced to fragments, the depleted uranium rounds punching through cover like it was tissue paper. The first pass lasted 3 seconds. When the echo faded, half the enemy positions had simply ceased to exist. The pulled up hard, banking in a turn so tight its wingtip nearly scraped the canyon wall, and Ortega watched it climb wheels up back into the narrow strip of sky above. Then it rolled, inverted at the top of the loop, and came back down. "She's insane," someone whispered behind Ortega. He thought it might have been their medic, Lopez. "She's beautiful," Ortega corrected. Because whoever was flying that A-10 wasn't just providing close air support. They were conducting a symphony of violence, each pass calculated, each burst precise. The second run hit the technical vehicles, the 30 rounds ripping through engines and fuel tanks. Fire blossomed orange against the night, throwing shadows that danced across the canyon walls. The third pass walked rounds across the defensive positions on the eastern ridge, silencing the machine guns that had kept the Marines pinned. And through it all, that voice on the radio, calm, measured. "Reaper 6, be advised, targets neutralized north sector, shifting fires to western ridge, keep your heads down." Ortega grabbed the radio from Vance. "Revenant, this is Reaper 6 actual. I don't know who you are, but you just saved our asses. We owe you." "You don't owe me anything, Marine," the voice cut in. Female, Ortega realized. The pilot was a woman. "You just focus on staying alive. I'm not done yet." In the command center, Colonel Rains watched a ghost come to life. Holt's transponder had flickered back into existence 3 minutes ago, appearing on the display like a resurrection. Now it danced through the valley in patterns that should have been impossible, the A-10's icon weaving between terrain markers that represented sheer cliff faces and ridge lines. The data feed from her aircraft painted a picture in numbers, altitude varying between 90 and 300 feet, airspeed holding at 240 knots, weapons system cycling through continuous engagements, and somehow, impossibly, she was still flying. "Sir, we're getting feed from Reaper 6, the operations officer said. "They confirm effective fire support. Multiple hostile positions destroyed. Marines are mobile and moving to extract point." Rains didn't respond. He was watching the threat board, watching the SAM sites that ringed the valley light up one by one as they acquired Holt's aircraft. She was being tracked by at least 4 different radar systems, each one feeding targeting data to missile launchers hidden in the cliffs. Modern surface-to-air missiles were fire-and-forget weapons. Once they launched, the aircraft was dead. Evasion was possible in open sky, where you had room to maneuver, where you could outrun or outturn the missile's motor. But in a canyon 12 miles long and half a mile wide, there was nowhere to run. Major Donovan stood beside Rains, his arms crossed, jaw tight. "She's been in there 11 minutes. That's longer than any of the others survived." "The others weren't flying an A-10, Rains said quietly. "And the others weren't her." Behind them, the ready room had filled with pilots and ground crew, drawn by the impossible thing happening on the displays. Someone had patched in Holt's aircraft feed, and now her heads-up display showed on the main screen, her view of the canyon transmitted in real time. They watched her line up another run, watched the targeting pipper settle on a cluster of enemy positions, watched the gun camera as the 30 rounds tore through stone and steel. Webb, the captain who'd called Holt a washout earlier, stood near the back, his expression unreadable. Rains caught his eye. "Still think she froze up in Kandahar, Captain." Webb's jaw worked. "Sir, I don't know what happened in Kandahar, but that," he gestured at the screen, "that's not someone who hesitates." On the display, Holt's A-10 pulled through another impossible turn, and the radar warning receiver in her cockpit screamed a launch warning. Revenant has Sam launch northern position. Her voice came through, still preternaturally calm. Deploying countermeasures. Reaper 6, you're clear to move. Get to the extract point. Rains watched flares burst from the A-10's wings, dozens of them, burning bright enough to overwhelm the infrared seekers on the missile. The SAM corkscrewed through the air, confused, and detonated against the canyon wall in a bloom of fire. But there were 3 more sites, and Holt was running out of canyon. Cade felt the missile detonate behind her, the pressure wave rocking the A-10 even through the distance. Her instrument panel showed yellow cautions, hydraulic pressure dropping in the right system, fuel flow irregular in the number 2 engine. Battle damage, not catastrophic but accumulating. The Warthog could take punishment that would down any other aircraft, but even it had limits. She checked her ammunition counter. 200 rounds left in the gun. Maybe one more effective pass. Her eyes flicked to the moving map display, where 6 blue icons, Reaper 6, were running south toward the extract point. 300 meters. They needed another 60 seconds. She could give them 60 seconds. The radar warning receiver shrieked again. 2 launches this time, simultaneous from opposite sides of the valley. Smart. They were boxing her in, giving her nowhere to turn. Cade's right hand moved to the throttles, pushing them forward even as her left hand pulled the stick back and right. The A-10 climbed, engines howling, vertical in a maneuver the Warthog was never designed for. Too slow, too heavy. The missiles tracked, their solid rocket motors burning white trails through the darkness. She rolled inverted at the apex of the climb, the canyon walls now above her, the valley floor below, and pulled through. The missiles, locked onto her heat signature, tried to follow, but missiles turned on thrust and fins. The A-10 turned on pure attitude, using every bit of its low-speed handling. One missile lost lock, confused by the chaff and flares she dumped at the top of the climb. The other one stayed true. It closed to 50 meters, 30. Cade jinked right hard enough that her helmet slammed against the canopy frame, hard enough that the G-forces grayed her vision. The missile passed 6 feet under her left wing and impacted the cliff face. The explosion lit the entire canyon, a flower of fire that blossomed and died in seconds. Shrapnel peppered the A-10's belly and new warnings lit her panel. Left engine fire. Hydraulic failure in the primary system. Flight controls degraded to manual reversion. The A-10 shuddered, started to roll left, and Cade fought the stick, forcing it level through pure muscle. Her training took over. Engine fire checklist, memory items, pulling the fire handle for the left engine. The fire light extinguished. She was flying on one engine now, manual controls, half her systems dark, but she was flying. Reaper 6, status, she called, her voice still steady despite the sweat running down her face. Revenant, we're at the extract point, Ortega's voice came back, breathless. Marking our position with IR strobe. You are cleared out of the valley. I say again, you are cleared to egress. You've done enough. Cade allowed herself a small smile. Enough. She checked her ammunition counter one more time. 180 rounds. She looked at her threat display. 3 more hostile positions between the Marines and safety. 3 more targets. 1 more pass. Negative, Reaper 6, she said. 1 more run, stay down. She didn't wait for argument. The A-10, wounded but not broken, dove back into the valley one final time. The command center watched in silence as Holt's aircraft descended again, trailing smoke from the left engine. The thermal feed showed the damage clearly now, a dark stream against the A-10's gray fuselage, the telltale signature of dying hydraulics and burned metal. Rains had seen enough combat flying to know what he was looking at. Holt's aircraft was dying. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the next 5 minutes, but dying nonetheless. She had enough control to limp home if she turned east right now. Instead, she was pointing her nose at the remaining hostile positions. She's going back in, Donovan said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. She's going to get herself killed. No, Rain said quietly, surprising himself with his certainty. She's going to finish the mission. On screen, Holt's gun camera activated. The targeting pipper settled on a machine gun nest that had been pouring fire toward the Marine's position. Cade's finger tightened on the trigger one last time. The GAU-8 roared. The machine gun nest vanished. She walked the rounds across to the next position, then the next, the depleted uranium shells tearing through rock and sandbags and metal. When the gun went silent, her ammunition counter read 0. Reaper 6, you're clear, Holt's voice came through. All hostile positions neutralized. Extract bird inbound, ETA 2 minutes. Get your people out of here, Sergeant. Ortega's response was almost drowned out by the sound of rotors. The extract helicopter, a Marine CH-53, thundering into the valley now that the threat was gone. Revenant, we don't have words. Thank you doesn't even. Get home safe, Marines, Holt interrupted gently. That's all the thanks I need. The CH-53 touched down in a storm of dust and noise. Raines watched the thermal signatures of Reaper 6 sprint across the open ground and climb aboard. 30 seconds later, the helicopter lifted off, banking hard east, disappearing beyond the valley's mouth. Safe. The mission that command had written off, the Marines they'd left for dead, safe. Because one warrant officer had decided that policy mattered less than people. Raines keyed his command channel. Revenant, this is Colonel Raines, Wing Commander. You are ordered to return to base immediately. We have emergency crews standing by. Acknowledge. There was a pause. When Holt's voice came back, it carried something that might have been amusement. Acknowledged, Colonel. One engine, manual controls, half my hydraulics gone. I'm RTB, but it's gonna be ugly. We'll take ugly, Raines said. Just get here. The A-10's transponder started moving east, climbing slowly out of the valley. Around Raines, the command center erupted in conversation, officers calling out damage assessments, preparing the runway, alerting medical and fire crews. But Raines kept his eyes on that single icon limping home through the darkness. Beside him, Webb stepped forward. Sir, I need to say something. What I said earlier about Holt, about Kandahar, I was wrong. I was repeating rumors. I never looked at the actual reports. Raines glanced at him, and the targeting system glitch was real. It's in the maintenance logs. Her weapons computer froze mid-run. She called off the attack because she literally couldn't verify her target. She probably saved a dozen civilian lives. Webb's jaw tightened. We crucified her for following the rules of engagement, for not firing blind into a danger-close situation. And she never defended herself, never told anyone the truth. She just took her demotion and kept flying. Raines felt something cold settle in his chest. How many others had judged her? How many times had she walked into a ready room and felt the weight of their assumptions? Captain Webb, when Holt lands, I want you on the flight line. Sir, you're going to be the first person to shake her hand, and you're going to tell her you were wrong. Understood? Webb straightened. Yes, sir. Understood. On the display, Holt's aircraft crossed the valley's eastern boundary. Behind her, the Black Valley, the graveyard of 9 pilots, sat quiet in the darkness, but not hers. Cade Holt had flown in, completed her mission, and was flying out. Revenant, the one who returns from death. Raines realized the call sign had never been more appropriate. Cade's hands ached from gripping the stick. Manual reversion meant no hydraulic assist, no fly-by-wire computers to help her. Just cables and pulleys and pure muscle, fighting to keep the wounded A-10 level. Every input required 3 times the normal force, and the aircraft felt like it was flying through molasses. But it was flying. That's all that mattered. The airfield appeared on her horizon, a constellation of lights in the pre-dawn darkness. Tower frequency crackled in her helmet. Revenant Tower, you're cleared straight in, runway 27. Emergency equipment is standing by. Winds calm, altimeter 2997. Roger Tower, Revenant inbound. She started her descent, feeling the A-10 respond sluggishly. The right engine was running hot, compensating for the dead left motor, and she could see warning lights reflected in the canopy glass. Gear down. 3 green lights, miraculous given the damage. Flaps. Flaps wouldn't deploy fully. Hydraulic failure. Fine. The A-10 could land fast. Everything about the A-10 was designed for survival. Cade found herself thinking about Kandahar, about the mission that had broken her reputation. She'd been cleared to engage, had the target in her sights, enemy position danger close to the Marines she was supporting. But her weapons computer had glitched, thrown an error, and for 3 seconds she couldn't verify her targeting data. 3 seconds. She'd called off the run, gone around. By the time she'd reset the system and come back, Marines were dead. The ground commander had filed a report. Someone leaked it. The ready room gossip started. Holt froze. Holt couldn't pull the trigger. Holt cost us lives. Nobody wanted to hear about the glitch. Nobody wanted to see the maintenance reports. They wanted someone to blame, and she was convenient, so she'd taken it, stopped defending herself, accepted the demotion, the new assignment, the whispers, because part of her wondered if they were right. If she'd been faster, better, more aggressive, would those Marines still be alive? She'd lived with that question for 19 months. Tonight, she'd finally answered it. The runway rushed up to meet her. Cade pulled power, felt the A-10 settle, and let the main gear kiss the concrete with a chirp of rubber. The nose came down. She was home. Emergency vehicles paced her as she rolled out, foam trucks and ambulances and fire crews ready for disaster. But the A-10 didn't explode, didn't veer off the runway, didn't betray her at the last second. It just rolled to a stop at the end of the taxiway, smoke trailing from its wounds, and shut down. Cade sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hand still on the stick, her breath coming in steady measures. Through the canopy, she could see people running toward her. Ground crew, officers, medical personnel. And in the front, a captain she recognized from the ready room, the one who'd called her a washout. He was running like his life depended on it. Cade popped the canopy, and the night air rushed in, cool and clean and alive. She unbuckled, pulled off her helmet, and climbed down the ladder on shaking legs. The captain reached her first. Webb, she remembered, Captain Webb. He skidded to a stop 3 feet away, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. Then he straightened and saluted, sharp, parade ground perfect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the flight line. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, dead wrong. What you did tonight." His voice cracked slightly. "That was the bravest goddamn flying I've ever seen." Cade returned the salute, feeling something unknot in her chest, something that had been tight for 19 months. "Apology accepted, Captain." More people arrived. Donovan clapping her on the shoulder. Maintenance crews swarming the A-10, already assessing the damage. Fire crews checking for hot spots. And through the crowd she saw him. Colonel Rains. The wing commander walked with the calm authority of someone who'd seen everything and was impressed by very little. But when he reached Cade, his eyes held something that might have been respect. "Warrant Officer Holt," he said, "I believe we need to have a conversation about unauthorized use of military aircraft." Cade straightened. Here it came, the court-martial, the end of her career. "Yes, sir." Rains studied her for a long moment, then quietly, "But first I want to hear about Kandahar, the real story, not the bullshit rumors. Think you can do that?" Cade met his eyes. "Yes, sir, I can do that." The debriefing lasted 4 hours. They sat in a windowless conference room, Cade still in her flight suit, facing Colonel Rains and a recorder that documented every word. She told them about Kandahar, about the targeting computer glitch that had frozen her weapons display mid-run, about the 3-second decision where she'd had to choose between firing blind into a danger-close situation or going around, about the maintenance logs that confirmed the malfunction, about the Marines who died before her second pass, and about the silence that followed when everyone needed someone to blame and she was convenient. Rains listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her with eyes that had seen too many wars. "You never defended yourself. Why?" Cade was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because part of me wondered if they were right, sir. If I'd been faster, better, more aggressive, maybe those Marines survive. I couldn't prove they were wrong, so I stopped trying. And tonight, what changed? Tonight I knew the system worked. I knew the weapons were good. I knew the only variable was me." She met his gaze. "And I knew that 6 Marines were going to die if someone didn't go get them. So I went." Rains nodded slowly. "You violated direct orders. You entered restricted airspace without authorization. You endangered a multi-million-dollar aircraft. By every regulation in the book, I should court-martial you." Cade didn't flinch. "Yes, sir. But those 6 Marines are alive because you broke those rules, and you flew combat that would make a 20-year veteran jealous. So here's what's going to happen." He leaned forward. "The unauthorized flight, that's going in your record. The violation, that's getting a formal reprimand. And then I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for the mission itself. You saved 6 lives and completed an objective that command had written off as impossible. That deserves recognition." Cade felt her breath catch. Sir, I'm not finished. You're also getting a promotion review. Warrant officers who fly like that don't stay warrant officers, and we're having a formal investigation into the Kandahar incident. If what you've told me checks out, and I believe it will, you're getting a formal clearing of your record. The rumors end today. He stood and Cade scrambled to her feet. You're a good pilot, Holt. Better than good. Don't let other people's fear make you doubt that. Rains extended his hand. Cade shook it, feeling the weight of 19 months begin to lift. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank those Marines. They're the ones who are going to tell everyone what you did tonight. Word's already spreading. By tomorrow morning, every person on this base is going to know your name.